Welcome to Rules and Regulations, assuring your game is certification ready. Okay, end of the day. Everyone's tired. I'm going to make you all put your hands up. Okay. Little games companies, put your hands up. Big games companies, put your hands up. Gone through certification before, put your hands up. Never even heard of what certification is and you're terrified because this talk now happened. Yeah. Considering your first game going through certification. Awesome. Hopefully everyone can get something out of this. Okay. So what am I hoping you'll get out of this talk today? So this isn't going to be about what certification is, what the tests are. Hopefully you'll already have done that, and if not, you'll go home and have a look. This talk will be a lot about why you should start preparing for cert early, and why you should start testing early, even when you don't think you're ready. How to prep your QA teams and your production teams internally, and then how to utilize certification QA from an outsourced point of view. Who am I and why is it worth listening to me talk today? So I'm the release manager up at Tantalus North. I started my career in QA in 2007, just before the financial crisis. My first company was at Pandemic, which then became EA. I was lucky enough to also work at Chrome and THQ, where I worked on approximately 10 games, and that was when I first started seeing the certification process, what it was, from a very low-level QA point of view. Prior to joining Tantalus North, I ran a small indie games company for about 14 years with my best mate. It was called Screwtape Studios, and my co-founder is Anthony Wood. I'll always give him a shout out. We created and released numerous original IP games. You probably haven't heard of any of them, but our biggest game was Damsel, which we released on all platforms. We also, by the end of our career in indie, we provided freelance release management, QA, certification, testing, and engineering porting services. And we were lucky enough to work on the ports of Void Bastards, Webbed, and Unpacking. It was just the two of us working by the end of our time there. So we did not have a choice but to hone our certification and testing processes intensely. I was also lucky enough in the middle of that time to get to work at Defiant Development as a lead QA on both Hand of Fate 1 and 2. And now I work at Tantalus North. I have worked as both the product manager and now release manager. And I also manage our QA team. And I've worked on multiple projects, including City Skylines Remastered and Horizon Chase 2 for both PS4 and Xbox Series X. And these are my cats, because you know what I look like. Bruce and Selena, yes, I am a DC fan. So over the years, I have been very lucky to work with some amazing teams on some amazing games. But I have watched many of these teams make the same mistakes. Not on purpose, not planning to, but they always had the same outcomes. These issues technically become smaller problems the more games you've released, but because console certification requirements update on a regular basis, you are very rarely an expert in the current platform. So the mistakes that people have made, they start thinking about console requirements really late in the process. Usually around beta, they're like, okay, awesome, we've done the game. Now I got to figure out how to release the game. This usually means that the requirements are not being thought about when building the systems that the game is going to be tested during console certification. The game usually then requires major rebuilds of systems such as save or load, suspend and resume, and you'll usually get about 3 to 4 probably unplanned certification passes, which can take up to 3 months. They also will only use outsourced QA and probably book themselves maybe 1 5-day certification pass. Usually no direction is given to that external team who do not know your game, and they have to test everything, which means that you are going to get a lot of bugs come back for requirements that you don't actually need to adhere to, which makes your time longer going through them all. I have literally had a team come back with a disc requirement game for a digital-only game because no one on the publishing side told them that they didn't have to test the disc requirements. And you'll also get a lot of times that tests will just state we didn't have enough time to get through this. Scheduling your certification pass too close to release. Each cert round takes approximately 5 to 10 business days. That's depending on the platform. That's for them to test, not for you to find the bugs that they've found and failed you on, fix them, make sure those fixes work, and then resubmit. I'll go into why this in particular is so dangerous in a minute. The other massive, especially first-time people going through cert, the biggest mistake is they plan to pass first time. Like this is in 20-something games on every SKU. I used to say once. I've actually had a conversation recently with someone that reminded me that I've been a part of a team that's actually passed first time twice in 17 years. It is a rarity, so never plan for it. If it happens, wonderful, but don't plan for it. The dangers of multiple and unplanned failures. Missing deadlines. Those deadlines may be internal, those deadlines might be external. You may already have told the world when your game is going to be released, and then it doesn't get released on that date. The cost of missing a release deadline is big. It's either big on your time. If you have a publisher or a client, it is big on their money. We all know how much marketing budgets are for major games. It's not small change. Also, if you've got a client or a publisher, the release date of your game has many, many reasons for having been chosen. The slate of the publisher or client, what games they're releasing that year, what other competing games are releasing in the same year. These things have been timed perfectly. Well, perfectly until somebody releases a game that's exactly the same as yours and no one knew about it. You can also lose momentum in your own indie marketing, ignoring the money side of it. If you're a momentum-based social media team, if you lose that momentum, or you can lose the good faith of the fan base that you have spent so long building. This one's pretty obvious. You can, if you're working with a publisher or a client, it begins to endanger the next project that you might have gotten to work with them because you weren't able to do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it. Resourcing issues. This one's interesting. This is bigger teams, mid-sized to bigger teams. Usually at the end of a project, you have already reshuffled your team. You've left a small amount of people to get through cert, and you are starting to work on your next game. And unfortunately, if the world is blowing up on the game trying to get through cert and you have to hit that deadline, it means you can't move those resources off, which can then jeopardize the next game that you're working on. And most importantly, it jeopardizes the release of the product, the quality of the product you're about to release. When you're rushing to fix bugs in a finite amount of time, you are never going to be able to make the most robust fix. You are never going to be able to test that fix in the best way possible. It's just, you don't have the time. You're also probably at this point working overtime to make sure, so you're also a little bit sleep deprived, which doesn't help. I come from a family of construction workers, and I tried to explain to my uncle what I do. And building games is like building an apartment building. And if you have to dig up the foundations of a building to fix a regulatory problem in your plumbing, after you've finished everything, you not only have to fix the plumbing, put the floor back down, put the carpet back over the floor, clean up all of the dust that's been created, and then jump around the floor and make sure it's actually stable. Making games is very similar. If you need to take apart and rewrite a fundamental system late in development, the stability of that fix is going to be very, very delicate. Especially if you're planning on DLCs after this as well. If you're just one and done release, stability isn't going to matter. If you have an unexpected hit on your hand and 10 years later you're still making fixes to that game and updating, then you are just pulling at threads at this point. This is what going through certification unprepared can feel like. And that is the structural integrity of your game. It's also hilarious that somebody did that on YouTube for money. So what can you do? My first suggestion is start reading the certification requirements as early as possible. At the latest, you should be looking during your alpha milestone. You should be looking at the requirements that your particular game is going to need to adhere to pass. I choose alpha for a number of reasons. Before alpha, you're often really in the weeds on what. There's a lot of decisions from a design point of view that need to happen. Often it doesn't necessarily make sense for a lot of those design decisions to be hampered with regulatory decisions as well. But at alpha, you should know what the basis of what you're making is at least. So break down every requirement into applicable, not applicable, and unknown. You're going to have a lot of unknowns, and finding those answers is going to be integral. And some of those answers could take a while to figure out. If you have clients or publishers, they may need to approve decisions that you're making. If your game has UCG, if your game has mods, if it has crossplay, all of these things take approvals on top of approvals. And the more stakeholders you have, the longer something is going to have a decision made. So start early. The last thing you want to do is know whether you're doing crossplay a month out from submitting to cert. Okay. Have one source of truth for all of those yes, no's, and unknowns. They will update continuously. So I personally, this is the fun bit. Did I learn this right? Spreadsheets. This is my one source of truth. I personally use a spreadsheet. I find it's easy to go through. I have also, just for everyone's knowledge, I've chosen Xbox's XRs because they are publicly available and not under NDA. These are the only ones I will discuss in anything because I have signed paperwork. This particular spreadsheet involves a summary sheet, which is amazing for your producers. It gives a really high-level idea of what you actually have to adhere to. These are all of your requirements. These are all the test cases. This becomes really useful for QA's planning. I also did fake these, so this isn't an actual game. So at the bare minimum, have this page. Have every requirement, know exactly what it is. I personally also have an actual requirements. Oh no. I'm not scrolling on a big screen. There we go. All of the requirements, this is where I mark them off, this is where you add notes. The test cases themselves, just broke a little this sheet so not everything has a pretty colour. BBT test is something very particular to Xbox, we're not even going to go there. The sheet becomes important. This is your one source of truth. One source of truth, sorry, I was told I have to speak into the microphone. No, there we go. Yes. There we go. So, I have seen teams split up the yes, no's and maybes, take them out. If it's a no, throw it away, don't need to ever worry about it again. The reason I keep everything in one place is because on most games I have worked on, a no becomes a yes. You do not know everything at Alpha. There will be a design decision that happens later in game that probably will end up meaning that one of those requirements you actually now do have to adhere to. So that's why I keep them all in one place, so you never have the chance of losing something. It also makes it really easy to search whether I need to actually adhere to it. It's all there, it's all in one place. I'll also make sure that anywhere that my particular game has to adhere to the requirement is in a note. That becomes very useful in a minute. So this sheet helps programmers and designers know what they've got to be working on. It helps a producer know how much work is needed, and then it helps your QA test for how long a test pass is actually going to take. That's one platform. If you're simultaneously releasing, run it for every platform you're planning on releasing on. Because I hate to say it, but every platform will have a contradictory requirement for the exact same feature. And knowing that early is really useful. So your internal testing team, hopefully you have one. If you don't, it'll end up being somebody. It may be an external testing team as well, but if it's an FQA team versus a CQA, functional QA team versus a certification QA team, running an internal pass becomes extremely useful. Now that you've gone through all of your requirements, you should then go through all of the test cases. Your QA team, now that they know what requirements are applicable, should then run through every test case and do the exact same yes, no, unknown. Your QA team should be able to, from this, then plan the most effective testing based on the test cases. Of those 173 test cases, some of them just say, play the whole game. If your game is an 80-hour game, you need to figure out which of those test cases you can test at the same time, because there is not enough time to do it every time individually for every test case. So planning out makes it very, very useful when you actually know what test cases you need to be adhering to. So I also would recommend doing an internal first execution of all of those test cases on your alpha build. It will not be ready, and that will be a good thing. You will then have either a task or a bug for everything you fail. It will track it, you will know what it is, you can add notes to that task or bug, you can add the test case directly to it so you know when you're fixing the bug how it needs to pass certification. I personally like to bug everything, but that's from the QA background. But I also completely understand that at that point you might just want to task everything out. You'll also have a lot of questions, and those questions will need to be answered sometimes before you can even start the fix. I feel like I'm going a little fast. So tips for your internal testing. Utilize the forums. Your game is unique and special, but it is also not unique and special. Someone has asked the question before. It may take some interesting search term choices to find the answer, but I guarantee you the kind of game that you have, the question will have been asked before, and the forums will tell you exactly how the implementation needs to occur for you to pass certification. Also, use the most commonly failed lists. All the platform holders have them. They say which requirements are the most failed and why. Quietly, it's terminology on all of them. I don't have it here, but a tip for that, for any QA in the room, or anyone taking it back to the QA, pull the string table out of the game and test your string table. Search the terminology that your game is using. Find it in the string. Don't rely on the game itself, because you might have an error message that you've never had to trigger, especially if you have an online game and this specific network failure you can't even test because it's a third-party system, but you don't know what error message is going to pop up, and it might say the wrong platform if you're in a multi-platform game. It might talk about a different account. Use your string table and use that as your source of truth. It also makes searching so much easier. You can just pull the words out of the official terminology lists individually and just search for them. And also another note, different platforms have different official localized terminology for specific words. The people who've hit that one and it's yeah.
Just press X to start.
Yeah. And then if you don't have the answer, if you can't find it on the forums, no one's written about it, no one's done it, just ask. You've got an account rep or you've got an opener support ticket. It is better to ask now, find out exactly how to pass cert with your particular implementation than it is to find out during cert. No one, that's the job of the reps at the different platform holders. That's what they don't want you to go through cert twice either. Like, it makes their lives easier as well if you just do it right the first time. So I work for a keyword studio. Why am I talking about just having internal QA when we've got a full service line of external QA? I very much recommend doing both. If you have an internal team yourself running these test cases, fantastic. Cert requires a lot of work. The bigger your game, the more requirements you'll have to adhere to, the more nuances as well. I find that combining the expertise of an internal team who knows the game and the expertise of an external certification QA team who understands the certification requirements backwards and bringing them together and guiding each other, You're going to get a lot more out of both. Most people don't get the best out of their external teams. Most people, as I said earlier, they'll book a 5-day slot. They'll throw a build of the game at a team. The team will give you a spreadsheet, ask you a few questions about your game, and that's how they'll mark off some of the requirements that you need to, that they know that you need to adhere to. They have very little context about your game. Certification requirements are a set of rules that every game has to adhere to. So they are not particularly nuanced a lot of the time. It's how they work with the nuance of your game that is where things get interesting. They also will have a limited time. As I said, if you have an 80-hour game and you've booked 5 days, there is no way that even a team of 20 can get through your game because they still only have 5 working days, and it's not one person can get through an 80-hour game in 40 hours. It's not possible. You can do things like give save files to your CQA team, help them split up that work. You have a spreadsheet now with every requirement that you do and don't have to adhere to. You can give that to a CQA team. They now have the knowledge that you have about your game. If you've made notes in this spreadsheet about where in your particular game each requirement is, I'll give an example. Save games are really interesting. Every game saves. There are standards on where a game will, when you load a game, when you load a game, when you load a save game, when you die, all these things we know usually will have a save point. If you have autosave, but they're nuanced as well. You might have an autosave, but that autosave might be every 1 minute. That might be every 15 minutes. Giving this knowledge to your team to be able to test, save and load is really useful. And as I said earlier, the lack of direction, they will often run every cert case unless directed otherwise. But I will always recommend it is useful to have, even though they don't know your game, having that outside view is really useful. Because once again, they do have that expertise in the requirements. This one's already also interesting. This is directing your QA team, that what your QA team has already done. You know where you've failed. You know where you've already, before you've left the building. You know what you fixed. You know what you had trouble with. You know what you had questions about. You know where you were like, I think this is how it's meant to be, and it works. Direct the team to those places. If you were like, oh my God, we only got to do a full run through of this one test case once, it would be really, but we did these other 8, like 14 times. Prioritize the things you didn't get to as much. Prioritize the places where you know were difficult to fix. Prioritize the places that you aren't sure about, and get the expertise of the CQA team on those places. I went a little too quick, because...
To the pub.
So hopefully this helps you understand why planning early is useful and what you can at least do with your individual game. I have to put this disclaimer. It's not gonna, like, even if you have passed cert fast first time once, never plan on it. I don't, and I have. And it still terrifies me when there's not enough time in a schedule to get through. And actually also if you're working with a publisher, especially an indie publisher, and they push back on how much time you need. Like, there's been some Wild West that I've seen, and it's very interesting. I was going to say something else, but I know when to keep my mouth shut.
Now I'm curious.
But yeah, this will not guarantee you pass first time, but I hope that at least gets you closer to passing on the second. And here's a cat playing Jenga. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I'm not in the position of having to do certification yet, small scale stuff, but you said Xbox are the only ones that release that, like, their requirements kind of freely. What does the process look like roughly for the other?
It's pretty simple. It's definitely, each of them have a developer website. There's a developer email. You apply as a developer. There are certain hoops to jump through. Sometimes it's pitching your game. Sometimes it's just applying to be a developer. And then that will then open up the portal for you, and everything will then be behind the wall. Usually just an email and a little bit of a discussion. And then there are opportunities to say, I'm getting in early and I don't have a game yet that I want to pitch. And until you then start setting up store pages, that should be fine.
Great.
Yes.
So a bit of a question here, but if you don't pass certification the first time, does it matter how badly you fail, or is it just the number of times? I'm just thinking, like, if there are 50 certifications and you fail 45 of them because you realise you weren't doing it correctly, but then you get that feedback for the second time, is that worse than, oh, it was all fine except 2 or 3 key things which you missed out?
It's not worse from their point of view. It's going to be worse from yours. There have been times when if you submitted again and failed on 48 and then submitted again and failed on 47, the platform holders are going to tell you to please go away and come back when you're ready. But there is an amount of leniency there.
How early do you start validating the TRCs and compliance in the development side? So as developers are rolling out the features that you're checking it in throughout the piece,
Best case scenario, as soon as the feature task has moved to in review, if it is a certification related feature, and some of them are very obvious, you know your save and load system is going to have requirements, I put those test cases on the task to get certification tested before the feature is even signed off. That's best case. Not everyone has the resources or time to do it. That's why I choose alpha. Like, run that task, run that pass at alpha. It gives you a chance to go, oh my God, we did not design this in a way that will pass, that isn't too late, that doesn't have so many other systems built on top of it that you're going to start messing with. Worst case scenario, I'd say beginning beta. But yeah, best case, as soon as that task goes into review. Also, especially if you have a QA team who maybe hasn't tested cert very often, if you're doing them one at a time as tasks are getting signed off, your QA team gets to practice those test cases as well. Yes.
Hello, more newbie question, but I'm wondering which systems this is most relevant for. It's come up a lot, like save and load, pause and resume, and with the press X, input bindings. What other systems are commonly found to be problematic when cert comes up?
Sorry, I'm checking my NDA. In my as I said, terminology is a big one. When you go onto any of the platforms, you are working with their brand. That is a legal IP related. There is no getting waivers for using the wrong word. There is no and it's a quick fix, but that is going to be one of the top failing requirements on every platform. Suspend and resume is an interesting one that is also nuanced. If you're building a multi-platform game, it's also nuanced on every platform. So it becomes a bigger thing to think about. It's not just being cert compliant on one platform. It's what has to change depending on what platform I'm on. Account linking, every platform has some form of account linking. When I say platform, I also mean VR headsets. I also mean the Apple Store. All of these, they all have their own sets of requirements. The three main console holders just have the largest amount. Anything online, because you then enter the child safety realm, will have requirements around it.
Do you mean like user-generated content? Or?
I mean going online.
Oh, just connecting.
Connecting online will open you up to needing end-user license agreements. It opens you up to having particular privacy and parental controls that the console itself allows a parent to trigger. Those now become cases that you need to be compliant with as well. And once again, you're working with consoles that have legal ramifications for the console. So those requirements become very, very hard to get waivers for. Or waivers. Is that a word that's really weird to anyone and is interesting for anyone to know about? Yeah. Some requirements you can go to a platform holder and say, look, this is how I do it. It's slightly different from how you'd like me to do it. And they sign off and say, fine, do it that way, but only that way because you've given me the reason why and it's fine. It might not break the reason we have the requirement, it just breaks the specific test case. So we'll be okay with it. And then those waivers are then brought up in certification as, okay, cool, pass. I'd also recommend getting those early because they take a lot of back and forth. Yes?
Are there any dev tools such as automated testing, for example, that the engineering team can implement into a project to help with this whole process?
This one's really interesting. And I think a world where most big companies are trying to figure this out. Your particular game will probably have tests, automated tests that will help your particular game automate. You know what I'm trying to say. Test it automatically. But every game is slightly different, so a full set of tools becomes a much larger undertaking for anyone to do it commercially. But I do know that there are companies that do tools that are looking at terminology, that are looking at localization and things like that, because those things will be the same for every game.
I was wondering if your experience getting waivers has differed significantly, with the AAA games you do with Tantalus compared to when you were doing small indie projects, you know, much smaller status games in a way?
I don't know if it's a surprise to anyone, but the bigger the name and the more games you're going to sell,
Yeah.
there are still, yes and no. There are some things I've still been surprised at and gone, okay, yeah, no. There are some things that will never get waived, but there are definitely some things that they will allow a conversation about being waived. The smaller the game, the more like, no, just do it the way we've asked. But there is an interesting place where, yeah, like, we'll enter the room and have a conversation about it, but half of the time there's still a no.
If you had to pick a set of TRCs that you think should be planned for the earliest, what do you think they would be?
They would be your fundamental systems. You know save load. You know suspend, resume. You know account linking. Like the big ones that if you have to change how your save load system works, rewriting it once a game is already released is fun and not something we've ever had to do. But yeah, from an engineering point of view, your base level systems become the most important ones they're harder to take out and put back in once you have realised. I'd also very much recommend, my old business partner may have a talk on GCAP from a couple of years ago, talking about how to write a game for multi-platform release. And that is I know from an indie point of view, you may not know what platforms you're going to have the money, time. Is my game successful? Awesome, I'll release it on more platforms. If it's not, then I don't know. But writing your core systems with multi-platform in mind, the fact that knowing there will be divergence on every platform is a very useful place to start as well.
So if engineers want to come talk to me afterwards, I can help the engineering side thing. I will hang around as well.
Also, yes?
Just what were the two games that passed first time, and you don't need to say what game it was, but what was the most times a game that you've worked on has failed? So.
Okay. I'm glad you said you don't have to say the name, because I won't. So, Hand of Fate 2, Switch, passed first time. And, blank, Unpacking PS4, passed the first time. Most fails. So the project had failed 4 times before I came onto it.
Oh, now I know what it is.
And then failed another 5 afterwards.
So what was the time of that? What was the length of time that they put their first attempt at certification to finally get it passed?
I think it was approximately 6.5 months. And a whole extra team to help. Awesome. Yeah.
Expensive.
Yeah. And very difficult to come onto a team who, like, you don't know the product. You have to learn the product on the fly. That's why we still failed another 5, because you're learning the product quickly. It was a fascinating journey, actually. That one was, I learned probably more than I've learned on any other product in my career on that one.
Now let's never do it again.
Yeah, exactly, right? That was GCAP last year, waking up at 4 a.m. Awesome, last question.
Have you ever known a QA team of 1
Welcome. This spreadsheet started for me. This is how I was sole QA on Hand of Fate 1. So 30-hour game, beautifully made, so much design, so much passion behind it. Sole QA, my first time going through cert on my own. I had been lucky enough to be on some larger teams who'd done cert, but I usually would be only on one platform as well. And so it was the first time I'd worked simultaneous release, multi-platform, and I had to do it on my own. I got to do it on my own. Had to sounds like it was. I got to do it on my own. And that's why I needed a play. That's why I use those spreadsheets. Is where that's come from. Is being that sole QA. It is daunting. It is a daunting task. There are so many words that mean something slightly different than what it does in English, than in what it does in certification language. They're very specific. From a QA point of view, don't just read your test cases. The answer for what the words mean will be in that requirement. It does mean there's a lot more things to read, but it's doable. It is 100% doable. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I shall let you all go. Thank you for coming.